Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Wherever you may be, I'm One Man Tea Party, and this is a video on monkeys, or at least the idea of monkeys. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too existential about our simian cousins, just talk about what a certain type of one-tailless monkey means to a little country we call England, and even companies like Disney and Blizzard. Some of you may remember a game called Overwatch, before Bing Crosby or something did something or other to them. I don't remember what. Anyways, in Overwatch there's a big genius gorilla called Winston, who came from the moon, but he lives on a little bit of land called Gibraltar. Gibraltar is a tiny territory jutting out from the edge of Spain, pointing towards Africa. It's practically as close as you'll get to the other continent from the Iberian Peninsula, thus has been a point of strategic importance for hundreds and possibly even thousands of years. For being such a tiny bit of land, dominated by a humongous rock jutting out from the middle of it, it's actually way more influential than you'd think. Archaeological digs have discovered that it was probably the last resting place of the Neanderthals, before somebody screwed that up. Lord Nelson, the mad lad himself, was killed nearby, and was pickled in brandy when his dead body arrived back in the territory. I say territory because Gibraltar is actually owned by the English, at least at the moment. Being connected to Spain, it's often been under control by the Spanish, though before then it's changed hands more times than the crusty old Mad Catz controller at a sleepover. England nabbed Gibraltar from the Spanish in 1704 after giving them a bit of a slapdown and have held it ever since. Waiting for their new overlords, apart from the people of the territory, were a group of monkeys. See, if you didn't know, primates aren't particularly well distributed outside of a few places. Africa, Asia, and South America are where they generally live. Gibraltar, being in Europe, was a bit of an exception, however. Europe doesn't have any primates except for humans, which made the monkeys that live in Gibraltar super interesting. The Barbary macaques, or rock monkeys, or rock apes, are a tailless monkey that live on the rock there. There are other Barbary macaques that live in Africa, but we'll get to them later. There's no written record as to how or why the monkeys got to Gibraltar. The closest possible point they could have swam over from, Morocco, is way too far for them to have monkey paddled over to. So as it stands, it's hypothesized that the Moors or Maghrebine Berbers brought them over when they settled in Gibraltar, as sort of pets or entertainment. This makes sense given that back over in the Arab world, there are records of monkeys being used for the same reason. So regardless of how they got there, the macaques are settled permanently, and don't look to be leaving anytime soon. It's important though, given that ever since the British took command of Gibraltar, that a legend sprung up. Sometime during the reign of the tea drinkers, a rumour started to mill around, stating that so long as the monkeys remained on Gibraltar, so would the British. Now it's most likely this was stated by the Spanish or some other past enemy of England. Just something silly. Or not, there's no actual source as to where the legend came from. Silly or not, however, it's stuck. The British began to take the conservation of the monkeys extremely seriously. World War II had begun to ravage the world, and Gibraltar, being part of the world, was included in the conflict. The Axis powers had begun barraging the rock and its inhabitants, driving the defending forces into the vast network of tunnels that had been carved out over the years inside of the mammoth block of stone. Bystanders in the conflict, monkeys not really being known for having opinions on geopolitical warfare, the macaques continued their business as usual, living on the rock. This meant that while Gibraltar was being bombarded, the monkeys suffered heavy losses. Only 7 of them remained, possibly not even enough to repopulate. After and if they survived through the war, it was then that Winston Churchill, chief mumbler of the United Kingdom, heard about the legend and the dwindling monkey population. Knowing the importance of morale, and that there was some more of them hanging around in Africa, he sent out a top-secret order to extract some macaques from the home continent and ship them off to Gibraltar to help refresh the population and keep the British Empire standing, as it were. The plan worked brilliantly, and the rock monkeys were suddenly growing in number again, which led the British finally win the war, and totally not for any other reason. Regardless, the monkeys were plentiful, and Gibraltar was safely in control of the British. In the post-war period, Churchill actually visited the rock and met the biggest monkey around, also named Winston. It's not known if the Prime Minister survived the encounter, but it's assumed not. Today, the monkey population still live in Gibraltar, being a major source of tourism and pride for Gibraltarians. Now, with a bit of context about Gibraltar, I'd like to stop, spin the wheel on all this history stuff, and talk about Overwatch for a bit and what it all means, without getting too game theory on it either. Overwatch 2 is coming out later this year, and personally I'm looking forward to it. I know that it's been in a bit of a stale state these past few years, and lost almost all of its goodwill thanks to every single damn slip-up Blizzard game seem to be making every other day. But with the fat being chewed and delays to make Tetsuya Nomura blush, I feel like it looks like it's in a fun enough state to play when it releases. The story of Overwatch has always been a thing that's been left more to the side, leaving the fandom to fester and speculate. But there's a lot there, and I'd like to put on my detective hat and clumsily put something together here. If you didn't know, Overwatch's story centers around a defunct group of superheroes and agents, Overwatch. They'd been shut down some time before the start of the game, only to be recalled by Winston, as he was the sole member who stayed behind, trying to keep Overwatch alive. In the story, Winston was named after the scientist who raised him on the moon, Dr. Harold Winston. But there's a level of connection with Gibraltar and Winston Churchill that always caught my eye. It's not something particularly major or groundbreaking, but I like to imagine that Winston was named after Winston Churchill, or his macaque equivalent. Since Winston is the last member of Overwatch who remains, I like to think of him as the last monkey on the rock. Although he's obviously a scientist, not a monkey. In some ways, history may have influenced a pop culture icon, which isn't unique by any means, but it's something I loved the moment I heard about it. This brings forward another thing I want to talk about, which is if a tiny, almost insignificant part of obscure history could have influenced something so large as Overwatch, then what else did it inspire? The answer is a children's book, and the Disney movie that was almost made based on it. Paul Gallico, an American author who is known for The Snow Goose and the Poseidon Adventure, had heard about the legend of Gibraltar after the war had ended and found himself fascinated. He decided that he was going to write a novel based on the story of the conservation of the monkeys during World War II, focusing on a gregarious young monkey called Scruffy. The book, Scruffy, a diversion, was published in 1962, though wasn't particularly remembered in history, unfortunately. It's a cute book, though admittedly a bit wordy. It's a comedy of the times. It tells the adventures of a rock monkey called Scruffy during World War II and his two handlers and the people in their lives. Scruffy gets up to all sorts of mischief while avoiding a nefarious ally of the Nazis who decides to try and end the monkeys and the Brits' reign over Gibraltar. A perfect story for a Disney movie, perhaps? Well, that's what Ken Anderson thought. Ken Anderson was the legendary Disney animator, who was responsible for many of the storyboard and character designs for classic movies like Robin Hood and The Jungle Book. He'd risen in prominence after starting in the company as an in-betweener, an animator who draws the frames between the main, better detailed frames. He was tasked with animating a sequence of some cats running across a kitchen floor and 3 orphan kittens, imitating camera movement with such skill that it caught Walt Disney's eye. Ever since then, Ken had been one of Walt's closest staff, working on Disneyland as one of the first Imagineers who helped design the park, and working on the movies mentioned previously. His career wasn't without hiccups, however, as he once set fire to Walt's mustache after accidentally giving him a faulty lighter.
Have you ever censored a chicken?
He'd also introduced using Xerox with animation, being a sort of photocopying system which sped up the entire animation process and made it a lot easier to put things together. The consequence, however, being that the movies that used it retained a liney, sketched look, which drove Walt ballistic when he found out about it after seeing 101 Dalmatians being finished, as it didn't compare well in his eyes to movies like Sleeping Beauty and such, where they were clean as clean could be. That's not to say the movies that used xerography were ugly. They look plenty fine to me, even to this day. After this, Walt ignored him and removed him from projects the year after, which caused Ken to suffer 2 strokes, which he thankfully recovered enough from to return to work. Walt forgave him and he was back working on projects again. Disney had recently released a movie based on another Paul Gallico book, The 3 Lives of Thomasina, which was about a cat who had died and come back to life. It was a live-action movie which made Disney consider adapting another Gallico book, as the author was very pleased with the adaptation and enjoyed being on set, as it was near his home in France. They settled on trying to adapt Scruffy, as they had found a perfect lead for the role, Tommy Steele, who'd originally been the voice of Robin Hood in Disney's animated version. Like his other Disney films, this didn't end up getting made though, leaving Tommy out in the rain again. Ken Anderson, however, who was pushing for the project to be made, began trying to develop it as an animated movie. It would be slightly different, with rats working for the Nazis trying to get Scruffy, and to put an end to Britain's rule over Gibraltar, as Hitler was known for being a superstitious man, and what's more superstitious than a legend about some monkeys? Unfortunately, which is common in the industry, the project fell through, with only a few small bits of concept art remaining from the project. The Rescuers were chosen to replace it as the next animated feature, also being adapted from a children's book. Ken tried to get Scruffy up and running again a few times before leaving Disney after finishing Pete's Dragon in 1977, but to no avail. Presumably though, that's it for influences that the macaques have had on media, at least as far as I know. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are coming out some point at the end of the year, based on the Iberian Peninsula, which means there could be a chance we see some sort of monkey Pokemon representing the rock monkeys. That's just pure speculation though. Where that leaves us, however, is somewhere else. Although it's tiny, not too important in the grand scheme of things, and maybe even a little bit boring, which I hope it's not, the whole situation left me wondering, how important is history when it comes to media? The simple answer is obviously that it's pretty important. It's where we get a lot of our stories and ideas of how the world works. From battles in history to political speeches and movements, to even a lone painter who made his mark on the world, not that one. History can create pathos, and with pathos it can create stories that'll be enjoyed for generations to come. That's not to say they have to be accurate as games like Neo show. William Adams was a real guy, though he didn't chase a druid who stole his waifu all the way across the world, at least as far as I know. His story's super interesting though. I'd recommend the book Samurai William by Giles Milton if you want to know more about it. It's a fascinating story about an English bloke becoming a samurai. Where things like Gibraltar and media like Overwatch and Scruffy are concerned though, I think they serve a dual purpose. I certainly wouldn't have stumbled across the story if I hadn't been listening to a Disney podcast, The Disney Dish with Jim Hill if you're interested. I'd also been looking forward to the release of Overwatch, which linked them up to me. From liking a piece of media to finding out what influenced it, real or not, means you can discover entire worlds of stories that you've never even thought of. So next time you really enjoy a movie, game, or book, then maybe look around and ask what inspired the creators. I can assure you there's always something. Anyways, I finished my cup of tea and I've been going on long enough. I've been One Man Tea Party. Thanks for watching.